On a cold November night in 1907, the door of the most beautiful private library in New York swung shut. Inside that room stood the leaders of America's biggest banks, the men who, between them, held most of the country's money. Outside that room, the United States was hours from financial collapse. Banks were failing. Crowds were fighting to pull their savings out. There was no central bank to stop it. And one man, 70 years old, sick, and more powerful than the president, turned the lock and slid the key into his pocket. His name was J.P. Morgan, and by morning, the men in that room would either save America or watch it fall. So pull up a chair, because tonight, the fire and I will tell you what happened behind that locked door. Hear that? That's my fire settling in. I'm Daniel Reed, and this is Fireside History, where the greatest true stories of the past are told slowly, clearly, and warmly, so you can enjoy them and grow your English at the same time. Tonight's story has a sick boy nobody expected to live, the largest check in history, and one locked door that decided a nation's fate. Get comfortable. We begin in 1837. John Pierpont Morgan was born in 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, and here our story breaks the usual rule. He was not a poor boy. His father was a powerful international banker, and money surrounded the family like the air itself. But the boy had a different enemy, his own body. Childhood seizures, fevers, endless illness. At 15, rheumatic fever hit him so hard that his legs stopped working, and his father shipped him alone across the ocean to the Azores Islands, hoping the warm air would keep him alive. He spent months there, a teenager, by himself, learning to walk again. And there was one more burden he would carry for life. A skin disease slowly deformed his nose, swelling it, turning it purple. The most photographed businessman in America came to hate every camera. Official portraits were quietly retouched. One photographer who met his stare said the experience was like facing the headlights of an express train. A body that betrayed him, a face he could not fix, and a father whose standards no son could ever quite reach. That was the furnace that made J.P. Morgan. Morgan entered Wall Street young, under his father's long shadow, and America gave him a perfect training ground: chaos. The railroads, the biggest industry in the country, were a mess. Too many lines, built too fast, drowning in debt, fighting price wars that ruined everyone. Fortunes evaporated. Ordinary families lost their savings in wreck after wreck. To be fair to history, young Morgan was no saint in those years. When the Civil War came, he, like many wealthy men of his time, legally paid a substitute $300 to fight in his place. Critics would remember that for the rest of his life. But somewhere in that chaos, Morgan found his gift. He was not an inventor. He was not a builder. He was an organizer, a man who could walk into a bankrupt, quarreling company, throw out the bad management, restructure the debts, and make the whole machine run. Wall Street even invented a word for it: to Morganize. One by one, broken railroads came to his desk and left as working businesses. And with every rescue, more of America's economy quietly slid under one man's thumb. The question was how far that thumb would reach. Then Morgan did something that shows you exactly how his mind worked. In 1882, while the whole world still lived by gaslight, he wired his own Manhattan home with Thomas Edison's brand new invention, making it one of the first private houses on Earth lit by electricity. It smoked. It short-circuited. The story goes it once set his desk on fire. He kept it anyway, because Morgan had seen the future, and the future ran on current. He poured money behind Edison, and in 1892, he merged the struggling electric companies into one giant, General Electric. Then, in 1895, came the moment that previews our locked door. The United States Treasury itself nearly ran out of gold. The government, the actual government, was going broke. President Cleveland, out of options, turned to a private citizen. Morgan organized a rescue, supplied the gold, and the country stayed solvent. One banker had just saved the United States. The first time. By 1901, Morgan was ready for the deal of the century. Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King, wanted to retire. The negotiation, as the story is told, ended on a golf course with a handshake and a price scribbled on a single sheet of paper: $480 million. Morgan reportedly looked at it and said, "I accept." Later, he shook Carnegie's hand and told him, "Congratulations, you are now the richest man in the world." From that purchase, Morgan built U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar company in human history. Newspapers gasped. $1 billion in an age when a school teacher earned a few hundred a year. Let's be honest, by this fire, not everyone cheered. Critics said one man now sat above railroads, steel, electricity, and the banks themselves, a private empire no voter could touch. They called it the money trust. Both things were true at once: the organizer and the octopus. By the way, Morgan believed nothing valuable comes free, but this fire disagrees. These stories cost you nothing. If you want a chair here every week, tap subscribe. And then came October 1907. Morgan was 70 years old, half retired, playing solitaire in his library, when the telephone began to ring and ring. America was falling. It started with greed. Two speculators tried to corner a copper company and failed. But their failure touched a bank, and that bank touched a trust company. And suddenly a terrifying question ran through New York: is my money safe? Crowds formed, then lines, then mobs. The Knickerbocker Trust, one of the largest in the city, was emptied by its own depositors and collapsed. There was no central bank to step in, no safety net at all. The United States government was, once again, powerless. So the country turned to a 70-year-old man with a cold. For 2 furious weeks, Morgan ran the rescue like a general, deciding, with his examiners, which institutions were healthy enough to save, raising emergency money by the hour, even calling the clergy of New York to preach calm from their pulpits on Sunday. And then came the night of the library, Saturday, November 2nd. Morgan invited the presidents of the city's great trust companies into his marble library on Madison Avenue, dozens of the most powerful financiers alive. He needed $25 million from them, and nobody wanted to go first. As the story is told, Morgan listened, waited, and then quietly turned the lock, and the key went into his pocket. Nobody, he made clear, was leaving until the papers were signed. At close to 5 in the morning, the pens finally moved. The pool was signed. The trusts were saved. The panic, within days, began to die. Years later, a government committee demanded Morgan explain his power, and the old man gave an answer that became his monument. "Is commercial credit based on money or property?" they asked. "No, sir," Morgan said. "The first thing is character, before money or property or anything else. A man I do not trust could not get money from me on all the bonds in Christendom, believe him or not, and his critics did not. That was the decision underneath his whole life. He lent to men, not to collateral." The country, though, made a different decision that night in the library. It decided that no nation should ever again depend on one old man and a pocket key. In December 1913, Congress created the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, the permanent fire brigade for financial panics. It exists to this day, moving trillions, and it was born, in large part, from that one November night, because the lesson of 1907 was unmistakable. The system worked only because one private citizen decided it should. Morgan never saw it open its doors. Worn out by the panic and by hostile hearings, he died in his sleep in Rome in March 1913 at 75. Flags on Wall Street flew at half-mast, an honor normally reserved for presidents. And now, the surprise this story has been saving. When Morgan's estate was counted, it came to around $80 million. A fortune, yes, but far below the giants of his age. John D. Rockefeller, a man you may remember from a previous night by this fire, read the number and reportedly shook his head. And to think, he wasn't even a rich man. The most powerful financier on earth had never held the most money. He never needed to. His fortune was smaller than his reputation, and it was the reputation, not the gold, that men followed into that locked room. Power, it turns out, is a currency of its own. That marble library still stands on Madison Avenue, but here is the ending Morgan himself chose. His son turned it into a public museum. The room where America's fate was locked away for one night now keeps its doors open to anyone who walks in. The key turned the other way. And that, my friend, is the thread to carry home tonight. Morgan's greatest asset was never the money. The estate proved that. It was trust. Character, he called it, before money or anything else. And character is built exactly the way you are building your English right now. Privately, patiently, on nights when nobody is watching. Nobody will ever lock the world's bankers in a room and wait for you, but people will lend you their time, their help, and their belief for the same reason they signed Morgan's papers, because of who you have quietly become. Keep becoming, one story at a time, by this fire. So here's my question for you tonight, and yes, I really do read every answer. That locked door, was it power or was it duty? Give me one word in the comments, power or duty. And while you're there, tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. Let's see how far this fire travels. If tonight's story earned it, tap subscribe. The deal stays the same here. You bring the chair, I bring the history. And next time, the lights themselves go to war. Two rival geniuses battled over electricity, the same current Morgan once bet his own house on. One became a legend, his name printed on every light bill in America. The other, the one who may have been right all along, died alone in a small hotel room, feeding the pigeons at his window. That story is already waiting by the fire. The fire's still warm, and there's always a chair for you. I'm Daniel Reed, and this is Fireside History.